Welcome to ACE TV. Asexuality is a sexual orientation or identity label that describes people who experience little or no sexual attraction and or desire to have sexual contact with people. ACE is not an acronym though. The letters don't stand for anything. ACE is like the playing card. The asexual spectrum is a complex spectrum of people and includes people with various experiences in what we call the gray zone. For example, gray asexuals, who might experience some sexual attraction rarely or in some circumstances, demisexuals, who might experience sexual attraction to someone but only after forming a meaningful emotional connection to that person. Today we'll be speaking with CJ and Ray, members of the diverse asexual community of Toronto, who felt comfortable sharing their experiences on camera.
Well, I identify as asexual, just straight out asexual. I don't experience sexual attraction to anyone under any circumstances, and I never have.
Yeah, I also identify as asexual. Usually if somebody asks me how I identify, they're not usually asking specific with respect to one spectrum. So I would say I would identify as queer aro-ace. So I'm also on the aromantic spectrum. To me, my asexuality and my aromanticism go together. They're part of the same thing. They're not for everybody. A lot of people talk about romantic orientation as something separate from sexual orientation. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I kind of do. I'm on the romantic spectrum. I identify as panromantic, so an attraction to all genders, but just no sexual attraction to go along with that, just strictly romantic. Before I found out about the asexual spectrum and the ace community, I grew up in a small town, so there wasn't very many resources, but I did find out about pansexual, and that's where the panromantic came from in terms of me, but that's how I identified. Starting out though, bisexual, because that was, as far as I knew, there was only straight, gay, and bi, but that's not true.
For me, growing up, it wasn't really something that I thought about. I wasn't interested in dating. I didn't have sexual or romantic feelings. I didn't understand until I was about 20 that most people actually do have sexual feelings, that it's not a metaphor. So I didn't really realize how different I was from everybody else, but at the same time, people who knew me also kind of realized that. We didn't have the language for it, but that was just sort of one of the weird ways that I was weird, because there were a lot of ways that I was weird, and people just sort of took that for granted. Certainly in high school, I experienced a lot of bullying and sexual harassment, and a lot of that was specifically targeting me because I wasn't interested in sexual stuff or dating stuff, and so a lot of that was really hyped up sexual harassment. So nobody had the language for that, but at the same time, we all kind of knew something was going on.
It's affected it positively, since finding out that not having a sexual attraction to people is completely normal and that there is a community and support out there. It's been able to give me a lot more confidence to talk to people about it and to do research or meet people and not have this looming feeling that there's something wrong with me, because there's not. It's a completely normal thing that many people experience.
Yeah, I identify a lot with that. Sort of finding the ace community for me, and back then, this was before we had ace, it was asexual community, and before there were many ace community spaces, there was really just the one. Right, so when I found that, it was a big, eye-opening experience for me. It's, wow, these people sound like me, at least about those experiences. And I guess this aspect of me being a freak, that's a thing. Other people do. It's perfectly normal. So that was, I think, a really wonderful thing. I have the language to talk about a lot of the ways that I do relationships, because I don't do relationships the way that most people in my world do relationships. Mm-hmm. And people to talk about experiences that we have in common, because I'm kind of coloring outside the lines a lot of the time in my personal life.
I found out about the asexual community mostly through the internet and through Tumblr, because before that I was pretty sheltered from my home life and school. It was a small country school, and I didn't have the internet up until like grade 11. But once I did, I kind of just happened upon it and was like, wow, these people sound like me. I have something in common with them. And from there, it just led to more and more research.
I had seen the word asexual in like a print newspaper article, and this was even before there really was an online asexual community. My mother actually brought it to me and said, do you think this might be you? And I didn't identify with it at that time. I didn't understand what it meant. It wasn't a very clear article. I think there are a lot of things, what I remember from it were actually quite misleading and not how we would talk about asexuality or the asexual spectrum today. But I remembered that. It stuck in the back of my mind. And then a number of years later, I was at a high school in my 20s, still had never dated anybody, never kissed anybody or anything like that. And I, by chance, observed some things. It's like, oh, you people are serious about this whole sexual attraction thing? And then I remembered the word asexual, and I typed it into a search engine, and by that time there was an asexual community. There really was only the one, and I found it, and that was it for me.
I think bringing more attention and more information would help a lot of people in like figuring out who they are and stop a lot of stress and like distress from happening, because I didn't find out about the community until just a year ago, and I'm 20 now, so I was 19 when I found out about it, and all through high school and all through most of my life, like, I just thought there was something terribly, terribly wrong with me. But now that it's something I know about and can have resources to find, just giving more resources for people to understand it and to like provide support would be extremely helpful.
I think that's a complicated question, because there's a lot of things that are very positive about having more exposure so that more people know about asexuality, the asexual spectrum, gray and demi identities, and all of that. Certainly some of the positive things we see out of participating in the Toronto Pride Parade, I've had people tell me they found our community because of that. I've heard back from service providers who basically talk about how they now recognize that asexuality and the asexual spectrum, those are real things. And basically they used to be doing what we would call reparative therapy, where they try and cure people's sexual orientations or their asexuality or their gray sexuality or whatever away. And after seeing us at Pride, they stopped doing that. I've definitely also heard from people who had put up with years and years of having unwanted sex, so agreeing to have sex that they really didn't want because it didn't occur to them that they didn't have to do that in a romantic relationship, and seeing us at Pride was a catalyst to saying, no, I can say no, I don't want to do this, there are other options. So I think there's a lot that's very positive about that. There are also a lot of conversations around things like consent, and about social structures, about social pressures pushing toward sexuality, racial relationship hierarchies that we have in the ace community that I think will benefit the outside world. So that's kind of the opposite of the question. But how is it's going to affect us? Part of the reason that it's complicated is that when it comes to a lot of the hostility or resistance that ace people face for being ace, a lot of that is kind of indirect at the moment. It's not like there are a lot of people out there saying, yes, I believe in asexuality, and yes, I believe that it's wrong, although that does exist. And some of that is coming from explicitly religious perspectives, although that's obviously not going to be an overall thing of religion. But having more awareness of, or more visibility of ace people and ace issues out there means that it's going to open up the possibility for some people to be target of hostility or resistance or violence because of their aceness, and that won't necessarily be positive right away or necessarily even in the long term. And I think that the people who are going to be most targeted by that kind of hostility and violence are people who are less likely to be believed for being ace. So there's going to be this idea of the real ace versus everybody else who maybe isn't for whatever reason. Or there are people that aren't allowed to be anything in the first place. So I think we're going to see a disproportionate impact of this kind of hostility, and we're already seeing that kind of thing on aces who have experiences that are more marginalized in whatever social context. So aces who are dealing with issues of racism, aces who are dealing with issues of homophobia, of transphobia and transmisogyny, aces with experiences of having physical disabilities or being disabled, also a lot of those issues. And I think that it's hard to predict how this is going to play out.
Being ace really hasn't affected my relationships all that much, since even before this I wasn't interested in like the dating scene or anything, but really it's allowed me to be more open with people and more confident. So even like with my mom and my sister or with my friends, be more who I am and more of an open, friendly person than being kind of on edge and jittery all the time, because I felt like I had this secret. And it's allowed me to make a lot of new friends, so I have a lot of friendships within the ace community, and it's good. So I mean, I think it's positively affected my relationships.
For me, being ace has had a huge impact on how I do relationships, and I think that's a large part of why I'm ace to begin with, and why I identify as ace, because I do significant, intimate, emotionally intimate relationships. I don't do romantic relationships. I don't do relationships that have any sexual dimensions or any part of that. So how I do the significant relationships in my life, usually one or two at a time, long term, are coloring a little bit outside the lines for what people are expecting. So we do have language for that in the ace community. We had to come up with this language to talk about some of the ways that some of us have been doing relationships. We talk about queer platonic relationships, or sometimes quirky platonic, or QP for short. And so those are relationships, they're not romantic, but they're also not adequately or properly described by friendship. They don't fit the friendship box properly. They might be friendship, but if you say, this is my friend, it's not going to convey the right meaning. So that's kind of the way that I do relate to people on a personal level, not all people, but the people who are sort of very important to me in my life. So having those conversations to figuring out, because there aren't the relationship maps, we sort of have to figure everything out as we go from scratch, and it's different every time. But that also has meant that I've had a lot of struggle within my own family of trying to get recognition for the relationships that I do have. It's not enough that these are the people who are important to me, this is the one person, or these are the two people who are significant in my life, whereas my siblings or cousins or whoever else can bring somebody that they're dating or a romantic partner and have the family welcome and accept that person and believe that that person should be present at, say, a family dinner or holiday or something like that. And for me, it's been a long struggle. I have been out to my family as ace for more than a decade, and I have a very open and accepting family. I have a family where we have several pairs of married women, so it's not a gender issue, it's not a homophobia issue in my particular family, although in some cases, in some situations, it might be. So I'm lucky that I don't have that. And over the course of time, my family has certainly learned a lot, gone under their way, try and listen. It's been a learning process, but that's one definitely aspect of my life where being ace and how I do relationships and how that fits into my life and in terms of my family and everything else definitely matters a lot.
Thank you for joining us today at ACE TV, and make sure to check out our next episode.
Find out more information about ACE Toronto online at acetoronto.wordpress.com, or follow us on Tumblr at ace-toronto@tumblr.com.